Everyone thinks our ancestors left Africa once in a long walk and just kept going until they hit Europe. That's not really how it happened. The real story is messier. Humans tried to leave Africa for over 100,000 years before it actually worked. There's a jawbone sitting in a cave in Israel called Miss Leah, dated to around 180,000 years old, that belongs to one of those early travelers. And here's the uncomfortable part. That lineage went nowhere. It just stops. No descendants. A dead end. So today's video is about that failure and the much stranger reason it eventually turned into success. There's a detail in here about what changed inside Africa, not outside it, that genuinely surprised the researchers who found it. We'll get to that. For a long time, the assumption was simple. Around 60,000 years ago, conditions got bad, people walked north, and humanity spread across the planet. One migration, one moment, done. Except the fossil record kept getting in the way of that story. There's also a cave called School and another called Kafsa, both in the Levant, both holding Homo sapiens remains dated to somewhere between 90,000 and 120,000 years old. People were there, living there for generations probably, and then gone. Genetically, they left no trace in anyone alive today. Think about that for a second. Multiple groups, multiple attempts, separated by tens of thousands of years, and every single one of them eventually disappears without passing anything on to us. Not because they died dramatically, just because over time the population didn't hold. Which raises the obvious question. Why didn't it hold? What was actually stopping them? For years, the leading theory was climate. There's a real phenomenon researchers call green corridors, windows of wetter, warmer weather that briefly turned the Sinai and the Arabian Peninsula from brutal desert into something walkable, even huntable. When those corridors opened, people moved through. When they closed, anyone still out there was stuck in a landscape that had just turned hostile behind them. It's a decent explanation. It's just not the whole one. Because here's the thing that didn't add up. The climate opened and closed those doors a lot, multiple times, going back over 100,000 years. So why did only one attempt around 50 to 60,000 years ago actually stick? A study published in Nature in June 2025 went looking for the real answer, and it wasn't outside Africa at all. It was inside it. A team led by Emily Hallett and Eleanor Seri pulled together data from 479 archaeological sites across the entire continent, going back 120,000 years, and mapped them against ancient climate models. What they were really tracking was something ecologists call niche breadth, basically how many different kinds of environments a species can actually live in. And starting around 70,000 years ago, that breadth exploded. Humans went from mostly sticking to favorable, familiar landscapes to actively settling into rainforests, arid deserts, high-altitude regions, places that would have been borderline unlivable for their ancestors a few thousand years earlier. In other words, before our ancestors ever successfully crossed into Eurasia, they'd already learned to become generalists at home. They'd practiced surviving everywhere, on every kind of terrain, under every kind of pressure. And that practice is what they were carrying with them when they finally walked out. Earlier groups, the ones from Miss Leah, from School and Kafsa, they weren't lacking courage or curiosity, they just hadn't built that flexibility yet. They left Africa as specialists stepping into an unfamiliar world. The group 50,000 years later left as generalists who'd already been tested by unfamiliar worlds, repeatedly, for thousands of years, without ever crossing a border. That's the part that caught me off guard, honestly. We tend to picture this as a single heroic exit, humanity bursting out of Africa toward destiny. It's almost the opposite. It's a slow, unglamorous accumulation of adaptability, with most of the actual hard part happening before anyone left. And there's a quieter detail in this that I think gets skipped over. Even after that successful group made it out, they didn't just sprint across continents. Genetic and archaeological evidence points to a population settling on what's now the Persian Plateau, the region spanning parts of modern Iran and Afghanistan, for somewhere around 20,000 years, before spreading further into Europe and Asia. 20,000 years? That's not a migration, that's basically a second homeland. Which kind of reframes the whole out of Africa idea. It wasn't a single departure, it was departure, settle, over and over, at a pace that's almost unrecognizable compared to how fast we move now. Most people who hear that timeline can't quite picture it. I still can't fully, and I've been reading about it for days. It's also worth saying, plainly, that this isn't a fully settled topic. There's ongoing debate about earlier dispersals, possibly going back 200,000 years or more, based on contested fossils like a skull fragment from Apodema Cave in Greece. Some researchers think there were several distinct waves, not just two. The picture keeps getting revised, which, weirdly, is what makes it credible. Nobody's pretending they've got the full map yet. What we do know is this. The people who eventually became all of us alive today weren't the boldest or the luckiest. They were the ones who'd already survived the most different versions of difficult in the place they started. And I think the reason this story stays interesting is that it quietly undoes the myth of the single brave leap. Most of what made us successful happened in the waiting, not the walking. If this is the kind of thing you find yourself thinking about, there's more of it here. Misli is still sitting there, by the way, that jawbone, just a dead end in a cave belonging to someone who tried first.